President Cyril Ramaphosa says finding solutions to the country's electricity crisis is a top priority. In his recent inaugural Presidential Climate Commission review, he stated that his government is making steady progress in transitioning from harmful fossil fuels and aligning with global climate goals. To delve deeper into the country's power woes, let's bring in our guest, the Director of Economic Modeling Academy, that's Dr. Pali Lehohla, joins us now, as well as Director at the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Sampson Mamphweli. To both our guests, thanks as always for making time. It's lovely to have you on the program. Dr. Lehohla, perhaps I can begin with you. The President also highlighting, of course, as we all know, that this transition will affect some people. The question becomes then, if we are to get this right, how do we avert moving from a climate crisis and averting an economic crisis? Let me rephrase that. How do we prevent ourselves from averting a climate crisis and creating an economic crisis? It's a question around this just transition.
Well, I think certainly, I mean, Mother Earth has been boiled for a very long period of time, particularly by the developed North, up to so far. Both China, Russia, the Western Europe have actually used fossil fuels extensively. Africa, to a less extent, in terms of emissions, only 3%. Of course, on the continent of Africa, South Africa produces 90% of that, but that's 3% in terms of global warming or other emissions. So certainly the just process must be just, and it has to be equitable in terms of contribution by different countries. And Africa cannot bear the burden of underdevelopment, which Europe and the Eastern Europe and China have actually managed to grow. Africa has a development challenge, and that development challenge has to be addressed. What has happened with the Russian-Ukraine war, it has revealed the hypocrisy of the West. It has shown that Germany and the UK have gone back to coal, while saying to South Africa that it must abandon coal. And South Africa says we abandon coal faster. The question is, Germany, which has renewables, significant renewables, is unable to scale those renewables, not only to provide warmth for their population, but it realizes that it cannot fire industrialization through renewables.
Yeah.
Here we are as South Africa, suffering a development challenge, an energy deficit, and we want to go for renewables in order not only to do and help in terms of providing energy, but also to fire our industrialization strategy.
Right. Let me begin.
How then?
Please finish your thought.
How then can we be convinced that renewables can fire our industrialization strategy when those who have better position fail to realize this?
And that's exactly,
this hypocrisy is terrible.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm hoping to go with Professor Mamphweli, who's also part of our discussion today. Prof, I mean, what does this moment actually teach us about how reliable renewables are in a context where the West is facing a crisis that's spurred on by this war in Eastern Europe, and they abandon this project to move to renewables and go back to fossil fuels?
Good morning, Dr. Pali, and the viewers as well. There are various factors that we need to take into consideration. One, if you take Germany, for instance, they've got the technologies. They don't have as much resources as we have in the continent. Two, there are obligations for the developed countries to assist the developing countries in fighting climate change. That's why we see some of the interventions that they are bringing on our side. I've read the article by my fellow guest here, and I think he got some of the things right, but I don't necessarily agree with some of the things that he said in the article. In terms of the 8 billion US, for instance, at this point in time, we don't know the conditions around that $8 billion US dollars. Whether we don't know what portion of it is the grant, what portion of it is the loan, and things like that. Maybe he knows, then he can assist us in that regard. But when you look at renewable energy, there are various factors. For instance, the cost of renewable energy generation, if you look at the levelized cost, it has gone down. It is now lower than the coal-fired or fossil fuels-fired power stations. So whether we like it or not, the transition is going to happen. It's up to us to be part of the transition or not to move with the transition. These things are like the fourth industrial revolution or the various industrial revolutions that we've had. When they were happening, it's either you become part of it or you follow behind. So that basically that's what's happening. So, and I'm going to give examples. If you look at what's happening at industry and commercial sites, new developments are coming with renewable energy. The old developments, they are already retrofitting renewable energy. You see rooftop solar PV because it's cheaper than buying electricity from Eskom. Eskom has streamlined the processes for wheeling, for instance. Industry is now buying renewable energy and wheeling through Eskom power lines. So if Eskom does not play a role in this, or government doesn't play a role in this, industry will transition by itself because the technologies are becoming much more cheaper, and they will be lagging behind. In terms of the global politics, so to speak, it's unfortunate that we see it with the Ukraine-Russia war at the moment. If you look at, and I've read so many articles that are saying all wrong things about renewables, saying renewable energy is failing in Europe and the West and all that. It's not renewable energy that's failing. If you look at South Africa, we've got our energy plan, which is the integrated resource plan, that is modeled around the least cost technology. And going forward, when we look at the just energy transition, we need to now bring in the socio-economic aspect into the model, which we were not doing in the past. And that is basically what is happening in Europe. They were using Russian gas as part of their energy mix. And now that the Russian gas, there are certain problems around the Russian gas, then their systems are failing, and then they have to rely on other systems for energy.
Okay, I guess the question though, Prof, is can we rely on renewables at industrial scale, given the deadlines that are being set in the global community, and given, again, what we typically go to as a default in the moment of a crisis?
I always tell people that we need to look at this not as renewables versus fossil fuels. Okay. We need to look at this as an energy mix and a transition. So we can rely on the energy mix as it is. Even our energy plan does not say do away with all the coal by 2030. It says ramp up renewables by 2030 up to about 30%. Okay. And then we've got an energy mix that includes coal, that includes gas, that includes other sources of energy.
All right, Dr. Lehohla, let's hear from you.
Well, the pudding, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. I think, get me right, I have solar panels on my house. So I know that this is useful. But 8.5 billion in the scheme of things for energy is a silly drop in the ocean. Question is the role of that 8.5 billion in distracting us from doing what we have to do.
And just to provide clarity,
it's not a lot of money. It's a bait.
Let me not. Let me just make sure that our viewers are keeping up with this 8.5 billion by providing this context. So this is money that was given to South Africa as part of a deal at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, right? So that money, my understanding, is a start, apparently. That's according to the presidency. But you're saying it doesn't go far enough.
Whatever you call it, whether it's a start or an end, it doesn't matter. It's a silly, small amount in the broader scheme of things for ramping up on energy for industrializing not only South Africa, but the continent of Africa. The role of that money comes as a bait for us to move away from fossils as quickly as possible. It's a loan, and it has to be paid. Now, South Africa is in a crisis of energy, similar to the one that Germany has. We have coal. We have a fleet that is not working, and we have cheap coal. The question is, when you are faced with that kind of situation, how do you ramp up your energy? If there is a bait that removes you from coal as quickly as possible, and you do that in the middle of a crisis that Eskom is dysfunctional at this stage, and you have coal and you have a fleet that can be ramped up, maintained, and you get coal, that's where the question is. We are not talking about what happens in 10 years. We are talking about now, whether we can leave the next day. And leaving the next day means we have to go to coal, because the adjustment to the grid, and Oliver TP says so, says the design of a coal transmission is not appropriate for renewables. It needs a lot of other things to happen. The question then is, why do we put our focus as a nation when we have an emergence, and what we know has been coal? That's the question.
Right. But what's your response, Dr. Lehohla, what's your response, very briefly, to the suggestion that, you know, as the name says, it's a transition. In other words, it's phased out, and the final destination, for lack of a better term, isn't a world without coal being used, but it's a world where coal is but part of an energy mix. In the event that we know that...
I agree with that frame. But the reality is we don't have electricity now. We have coal, we have a fleet that is not well maintained, so that we get energy now, while that transition happens. We cannot be fed a future transition when we are in a crisis now. And the behavior of Germany and the UK in the phase of transition is that they went back to coal. And that's the point I'm making. I'm not against renewables. I'll be foolhardy to say so. At times I often say that perhaps we should be allowed to pollute as well, because all others have polluted. They've had their time to pollute and industrialize. Now, it will be a foolish argument to make that we should be given a chance to pollute. But the hypocrisy that comes when others have done that before, and when they are in a crisis, they abandon everything. They melt the planet.
All right.
What should we say ourselves? That's the question.
Professor Mamphweli, let me get you a final bite of the cherry. And we've heard what Dr. Lehohla is saying before, isn't it? You know, it's the global north, essentially, that has contributed the bulk of carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, as it were. And it feels like the burden, though, of moving away from that is placed on the global south, even though, quite frankly, our contribution to the crisis has been minimal.
Yeah, I've had these kind of arguments before, and I always take the stance that the fact that somebody else has done wrong shouldn't be used to say we must also do wrong. And I don't subscribe to that. The effect of climate change are felt mainly by the poor. If you look at what happens globally. So in my view, we can fire our industrialization using renewable energy. China has said that as well. They are busy planning to fire their fourth and fifth industrial revolution using renewable energy. And I've already indicated that it's unfortunate that we had the war in between Russia and Ukraine that got us where we are today. So the whole issue is around whether the West has got an obligation to assist the developing countries in their transition, and we need to look at the planning, like I said, to say how do we bring in the socio-economic aspect into the planning?
All right.
The doctor there indicated that he's got solar panels on the roof. That's an indication that renewable energy works. So renewable energy works, and it's cheaper now. I need to say this. It's cheaper, Doctor, to produce electricity using renewable energy than coal.
Right.
The coal fleet that is giving us problems now, you can't resuscitate that coal fleet. Most of the parts there have gone obsolete. This fleet has not been properly maintained for the past 7 to 10 years. Maintaining that fleet is going to take a lot more money than building new renewable energy power stations.
Prof, I have to come in there. Gentlemen, we're never going to get down to solving the energy crisis in the time we have together. Perhaps let me take advantage of this moment to invite you into studio. Perhaps then we might be able to ventilate these different views. But let me thank you for your time and for always being available, even on these kind of debates. Pali Lehohla and Professor Sampson Mamphweli, once again, thanks very much indeed.